487-0679.
Okay, here we go. Today is February 28th, 2014. I'm Susan West. I'm in Hatteras Village talking with Jeff Oden. Jeff, can you tell me when you were born, your birth date?
9/2/52.
And were you born here in Hatteras?
Buxton.
Oh, you were born in Buxton?
I was up at the little medical center there by the Fesden Center. That's where I was born. So,
was that a Navy hospital?
No, it was just, I think, actually, my mom showed me a photograph the other day, and the doctor is still living. His name was Dr. Tharp. And,
wow.
So anyway, yeah.
Wow. And so he served the whole island, do you think?
Yeah. At that time, they had a little medical. You remember that, don't you? That
vaguely.
It was off to the side over there, sort of where the ball field is now.
Okay.
You know, off the southwest corner of the Fesden Center.
Do you remember when they tore that down?
Probably about the time they built the Fesden Center, I'm guessing. You know.
Okay. I remember
it was a brick building there for quite a while.
I vaguely remember it sitting back there off the road. What was your dad's name?
Garlis Oden.
Garlis?
Carlos.
Carlos.
Sorry. Anyway, yeah.
And your mom?
Yeah, Josephine.
And what was her maiden name?
Austin.
So they were both born here?
Right.
Okay. Was your dad a fisherman?
My pop, he worked at my grandfather's fish house, and he later on had Oden's General Merchandise before he started the motel. And anyhow, that was probably one of the first surf shops on the island. I'm only kidding, but in truth, a bunch of the local kids, when I started surfing, he ended up. He used to sell toys to his store.
Okay.
I'd go with him to Norfolk there in his truck there and pick up toys and all kinds of stuff. And I saw these old, essentially what were known as pop-outs. That's
what does that mean?
They were old foam surfboards, and the rails weren't taped. And they had a tendency when we'd take them to the beach, you know, they'd stay out in the sun for part of the summer there, and first thing you know, the rails would start cracking, and then they'd fill up with water, and that's probably why my back is hurt, either that or and I'm not sure which. But
where was your dad's store?
It's where Nito's is now.
Okay.
It's Oden's General Merchandise then, and he ran it until Mark took it over, and he let Mark have it, and he went out to the motel.
Okay. And Mark was
That was my Uncle Donald's son.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So it would have been one of your dad's nephews.
Right.
Okay. Is that where your grandfather's fish house was?
Well, it was where Oden's dock is, and that was Uncle Donald had it after Granddaddy got through. I'm not sure when he finally got out of it, in the early 70s or late 60s. And Uncle Donald had it.
Okay. Well, what was your grandfather's name?
His name was Dan.
Okay. So, your grandfather was Dan, and he had at least 2 sons then.
Oh, he had 2 sons and 3 daughters.
Okay. And did you ever hear where the fish that he bought, where that went?
They went, back then, they had the mail boat that would come over, and it would also carry fish to the mainland, to Elizabeth City, and plus he would, my father, he was all the time running the truck. He would take them to Norfolk or some of the dealers up there, Fast Brothers or whatnot, and anyway. It was interesting times, I'm sure, in all those old photos you've seen the freight boats that would in that day and time they were delivering them, and then they got the road, and and the bridge. And
Well, somebody once told me there were something like maybe 9 fish houses here
Right.
in Hatteras Village.
It was sort of like general stores. There was one for about every 3 families. It seemed like.
Okay.
Yeah, there was
Okay.
plenty of general stores here too. I don't know if you've ever heard, but I mean, there were at least 8. You know, and
You're kidding me.
And there was,
Wow.
you know, from Lee Robinson's right on around, and then all
Wow.
the way out to Willie Newsom's on the beach, and so, yep, there were plenty to go around, you know. But
Did your mother's family, what did her
and then
parents
she had
do?
a general store too.
Oh,
so,
she
yeah,
did?
that was Austin's. That's where
Okay.
she grew up, in that building, and
Okay.
right where Eddie's living now. That's where she grew up as a
Okay.
child. That was built in the 1902, I think. So it's been there that long. So
Okay.
in fact, there was a photo of both my grandfathers in their stores, and they're both of them in their stores. Yeah. So,
Amazing.
Yeah.
Merchants on both
Right.
sides. So, do you remember your first commercial fishing job, or when you first got paid for fishing?
Yeah, I remember first time I went out. Well, when I got out of college, I ended up became a welder in a nuke plant in Southport, and there I kind of got befriended a guy, a shrimper from Southport, and he kind of got me the notion in my head to go fishing, and I ended up back here, you know, after about 2 years in that job, and one day Wayne Miller decided, well, come on, he just bought a boat, and he was out king mackerel fishing, and so I went out with him, and that pretty much sealed the deal right there. You know, that was too much fun to get paid for and not want to be a part of it.
So that was king mackerel fishing. Do you
Right.
remember anything about Wayne's boat? Was it
Yeah,
a large boat, or
no, Wayne had about a 26-foot Billy Holton built boat. And,
was he experienced? Did he know what he was doing?
He was kind of he'd done it a year or so. And
Okay.
back then we were all using hand lines instead of the downriggers and electromates that we have now. And you know, we were old school, but anyhow, it was an interesting day, and I was definitely hooked.
And so did you keep on with king mackerel fishing?
Well, I ended up, I was still, at that time I was a welder on the state dredge down in the inlet there where they built the islands, and I kept seeing the boats going and coming all day, and just pretty much made up my mind that was where I was going. So, and shortly after that, I ended up saving enough money and got a little loan from my parents. That was my father. He said, "You're going to starve to death," because he'd watched all the old fishermen, you know, of his day. They essentially, you know, they had 2 or 3 things they could do. They'd go out drop netting, and in their day, they didn't even have a bottom machine to find the fish. Or they could go long hauling or pound netting. And at various times, you know, as fisheries have always done, they'd ebb and flow, and sometimes it'd be good, and sometimes they'd be heading for the Coast Guard or whatever, you know, just trying to find another avenue to make a living. But you know what came
But he
along,
did make you a little loan.
well, yeah, made me a little loan, and I ended up buying a little DC boat, 26
What's a
footer.
BC
A
boat?
Buddy Kennedy.
Okay.
And it's still here. Shelton Willis still has it. It's a little blue boat down there, one of the prettiest boats in the creek to this day. And
Why?
great crab
Why
boat.
is it pretty?
Well, because it's just got the Carolina flair in it. You know. And,
Okay.
it's Buddy Kennedy. Nobody will argue with the fact that he probably builds one of the prettiest Carolina-style boats around. I mean, there are many of them still sailing here.
And where was he?
He's
In
Manio.
Manio?
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Okay.
And actually, he also built my second boat. That was one he built for himself to crab with. And anyway, started using that thing also to crab plus drop net. And back then we didn't have net reels. We were pulling by hand.
What year are we talking
That was
about?
76, 77.
Okay. So you didn't have net reels.
No net reels back then. So.
When did net reels become used
there was
here?
one big bill that actually gotten one a few years, right around that time frame, and I think he'd put it on the Albatross, and I was fishing with that. He got it from Sea Grant, and being a welder, it didn't take me long to see the light, and ended up building one for myself. And actually, I never got around to doing it the 2 years I had the boat that Shelton now has. It was too small for one, actually.
Oh.
There was just no room in it. And so ended up pulling by hand with that for 2 years. Then I got the Miss Marcy built by BC again, and that was actually the first build he built in his new shop, which shortly after he built the Miss Marcy, he started building all these charter boats for these guys that are probably, there's probably 5 or 6 of them in Hatteras Village down here, and the same in Argonella, yeah, and I mean at the fishing center. And of course Buddy Kennedy, he's a legend, so he's definitely left a name there in the boat building business in Dare County.
So when you started fishing with your first boat, what type of fishing were you doing?
King mackerel fishing was the main reason I got that little boat of Shelton's, and anyway, that was the main reason. And drop netting, doing what we all have evolved into doing. Period. I mean, we're netting king mackerel, netting Triton croakers,
and did you fish year round?
Oh yeah, I ended up at that time. L.B. Fulcher came along, and he's not too long, or prior to that, he'd been a chief in the Coast Guard at Hatteras Inlet, and he retired at 37. And anyway, we decided he needed a hand pine netting, him and Lynn Oden. Lynn didn't last long at it. He decided wasn't for him. Anyway, LB and myself teamed up, and as your husband and all the other guys did, went pine netting, and I did that for 8 years, during the summer. And anyway, by that time I got another boat. I named it the Sea Band. I was over pine netting. I was over the same. So
why?
Why? Because it was just too much work, and too much work involved on land, and
with the pound
with
netting,
the pine netting, you were forever mending them. You were getting steaks, and during, there was, as I was mentioning before, my father told me I was going to starve to death. Well, there were so many more opportunities as when I was coming along than when his parents were doing it, and it wasn't just long hauling and pine netting.
Right.
We had king mackerel, we had drop netting with electronics that would actually help you find them. Interestingly enough, when I first started drop netting, I did it with Tracy Austin and Ivy Austin. We're on the little boat, the boat that Shelton had, and we're all three going at it. And Ivy said, "We don't need a bottom machine. I can smell them." Well, we all figured out Ivy had sinuses that month because we starved to death until we finally got us a bottom machine. And when we did that, the first day we had about 35 boxes, and tried.
Wow.
Anyway, from there on,
where did you sell those fish?
I'm pretty sure I was selling those to Dolan Gaskell. You remember?
Top
Dollar Seafood.
Okay.
Either him or Jimmy Austin. It might have been Jimmy, actually, who was there first, and then I think Dolan came later. One of the two.
And this time period, there were about how many fish houses?
There were at least 8. Let's see. There was 7 or 8. There was Top Dollar. There was Diamond Shoals in there somewhere. You had Nunamakers. You had Quick Pack. You had Jeffrey came along in there somewhere. You had Tillman, he popped up, and I know there was one or two more there. Jimmy Austin, as I said.
Was Eve buying the
Eve,
fish
yeah,
then?
Cape Hatteras. How could I forget Eve? How could I?
Who else?
Anyway, there were, it was like in the old times. There were always plenty of fish houses, and anyway, it's sad now. There's only 3 left.
So, what type of fishing do you do now?
Well, now I'm predominantly longlining, and I just hope I survive the coming year, because right now it's not looking good, because in our case there's Amendment 7 that has just come down the pike, and bluefin tuna are the issue, which it's
and this is from the South Atlantic Council?
No, this is from the highly migratory species.
Okay.
Anyway,
and what would the impact of that be on you?
There are 85 longliners from the Gulf through Maine that are active on the 2 coasts, and they supply
That's
70.
all?
That's all there are, but less than 100 active. Okay, and I should emphasize that. I think there are 120 or so permits that have been deemed active, but they're not really active, and there's 85 or so. And interestingly enough, what our situation is, we supply 70-some% of the yellowfin, the big eye, the domestically caught, that is. And,
these 80 boats do?
And swordfish
Okay.
to this country of the domestically caught product, and we're held accountable to. We have 8% of the allocation of the bluefin tuna, whereas the general category, which ideally is an open access fishery, whereas ours isn't, and they are allowed 47%, okay? And the problem
why
with this,
is that, though?
Why is that? Because
yeah.
it was the initial allocation. When before there was never an issue with the fisheries, it essentially, we weren't held accountable to the quota. And the truth is now, for instance, last year the general category only caught 56% of their quota, but this coming year we're going to be shut down if we exceed our quota. What is so ironic about it, at the very end of this past year, trying to allow the general category participants to catch their quota, they were allowed 5 a day. This coming year, I'm going to be allowed 8 a year to longline. That's all we're going to be allowed to interact with. So
8
fish a year, 8, and yet ideally a general category participant could go out. Anybody could get a permit tomorrow and catch. At the end of last year, 5 a day they were allowed. Right now, off Hatteras here, in our southern quota, they're allowed 2 a day.
Wow.
But anyway, when they go north, they're allowed 5 a day.
What species do you target longlining?
We target primarily right now it would be swordfish, and in our summer fisheries it's usually yellowfins and big eyes right out front here on the point, and a little north we'll go as far north, or I do. I'm one of the little guys. I've got a 46-foot boat, and I'm one of the little guys in the fishery, and so I don't travel much more than 150 miles from home, maybe 2.
And is that both north and
both
south?
North and south, primarily north.
Okay.
In the summer. Right now we're only allowed to go down to the 34, which is, it's probably the lower end of the state, and
Okay.
or actually it's off Lookout. That's all we're allowed unless you go way east, and anyhow, that's no place for my boat this time of year.
Well, how many, what's your crew size? How many guys usually work with you?
Between 2 and 3 guys.
And when you head up north, 150 miles away or so, where do you unpack?
I've been bringing them to Hatteras. And I've got to put me a bigger fuel tank in because I've been running on empty when I come in here just about. I mean, it's just, I can pack in wine cheese, but it's just such a pain in the butt to drive up and work on your boat with the traffic in the middle of the summer. I just, at 35 miles an hour, I just didn't come to Hatteras.
Okay.
Take a little longer to get home, but I can at least work on my boat here.
And then what do you do with the fish when you get here?
We pack them at wine cheese,
Okay.
wine cheese seafood, and they...
Do you have any idea where your fish end up? What markets they
yeah,
end
well,
up
that's an interesting point, and I need to finish making my case for the longline fishery.
Okay.
As I said, we supply 75 to 80% of the species as mentioned before, and ideally we're trying to feed the American consumer. Ideally, every general category fish are going to Japan, and that's something that needs to be understood. You know, they're catering.
Why is that?
Because that's where the money is. And in our case, you know, our yellowfins and big eyes are consumed primarily domestically, as well as our swordfish. So we're holding hostage this very valuable $30 million fishery to a bluefin tuna, when ideally every one of those that are caught are going to go to Japan. And
so are you saying that the fishery is regulated to benefit the export market?
The way it's heading, that's exactly what's happening.
Rather than feeding
trying
people
to feed
in
the
this
domestic consumer. And it's just an upside down world from our perspective. Again, there are 4,000 participants plus in the general category, which you know, the better half of those are probably doctors and lawyers sponsoring their sport, and yet they're not dedicated fishermen. And I'm not taking anything away from those that are dedicated at it, but you know, it's set up. It's just upside down the way it's being.
So you don't have to be a bona fide commercial fisherman.
No income qualifiers involved in the general category. You could get one yourself, a permit tomorrow on a boat, and go catch a general category bluefin tuna. So,
your boat, the Seabound,
right?
But that's the second Seabound that you had, right?
I've had 2, yes.
Okay, and the one that you have now, where was that built?
It was built in Surrey, Maine.
Okay.
Yep.
How did you find that, or
did you? I was, you know, it's just.
Did you have it built, or did
I had it built and shipped it down here and finished it out myself. I got the hull and the hose and the decks built and put the motor in myself. And
how did they ship it down here?
They bought it by a truck.
Okay.
And, same way as the old Seabound. That was built in Korea, Maine, and neat little beautiful town, and you know, middle part of Maine, just north of Bangor. I mean, what is it, Southwest Harbor or Bar Harbor? Sorry.
Bar Harbor.
Bar
Okay.
Harbor,
Okay. So, is the boat you have now your most favorite boat you've ever had?
Yeah, and it's definitely going to be my last one. So yeah, it's my favorite. And you know, if I thought there was a future in what I'm doing, I would love to have a bigger boat, even though I'm running out of hours on my meter. At 61. So, but anyhow, I don't know. I'm still going. You know, I enjoy longline. It's I'd do it when I'm 70, I'm sure, you know, to a degree, but
well,
anyway.
You like longlining. Out of all the fisheries that you've worked in,
Do you have any particular favorites? Any?
Well, I'd say longline, and you get a string of big eyes on there. It's mighty pretty, you know, as well as swordfish, and you know, they're pretty lucrative fish, you know, when you put them on the deck, and you know, you can. They're definitely the most valuable of anything I've fished for, you know, at a given time, and you know, hey, when you're catching, it's all fun, you know. That's just the way it is, though. But I mean, hey, I love netting a king mackerel. I love hooking them. But I don't know. Bottom fishing.
Do you set the long lines at night?
We set them. Well, it depends. Sometimes, certain times of the summer, we've been setting in the daylight, and but you know, we're setting the point. Usually, we'll go up there and set the tide where it shoots off to the east, up at you know, the point being straight off of Rodanthe Salvo waves. That's essentially where the Gulf Stream and the Labrador intersect, and the Gulf Stream goes due east, or east-northeast. And anyway, we'll set the tide, and sometimes we'll set about 6 o'clock. And usually we'll start hauling our gear about 12 or 1 in the morning, and fish all night. So.
And how long are the long lines, and how many hooks?
We're only allowed 20 miles in the mid-Atlantic. You go north and south, and you can set more if you'd like, but from the mid-Atlantic, the whole mid-Atlantic, we're only allowed 20 miles, and usually I set about 750 hooks on that.
Okay. And what would you say to people who say long lining is not an environmentally friendly style of fishing?
All I've got to say is, from what I have done in the last few years, I've carried observers, I've done weak hook studies, and you know, to anybody who thinks it's there's any fishery that's benign, they're wrong. You know, there is nothing that has no impact that we do, and be it general category bluefin tuna, where you have a short fish and you 72.5 inches, and you put a gaff in it to make sure you don't lose it while you're sticking the tape on it or whatever. I mean, there is nothing you do, catch and release mortality recreationally, there's nothing that's benign. But you know, you've got to consider the value that we put on the dock for the time, you know, the time that we're at there. And I mean, what is the most efficient way to put it on the dock? I mean, long lining, I mean, there's absolutely, it would take 500 general category green stick boats to do the same thing, and you know, you've got the carbon footprint of all that. That's certainly not benign in itself, and nothing about those fisheries are, you know, you've got undersized yellowfins in any of it. I mean, you've got mammal impacts in all of it. There's nothing that you do out there that does not have an impact, in spite of the most recent vision I saw from the CCA, which is essentially trying to make the statement that you know, every time they go to sea, it's beneficial because. Did you see that?
I did.
Yeah, wasn't that wonderful?
So what, if you had to identify one or two top challenges that you faced as a fisherman, what would those be?
Right now, finding something to do tomorrow, because you know, in all this time, as I told you, my father told me I was going to starve to death. Well, if he were here now, he might finally get to say, "See, I told you so," because I've been shut out of the bottom fishery, and I think I made my case to you. I told you, you know, there's no recreational ACLs, don't count. They went over 30 times on, for instance, snowy grouper on their ACLs in South Florida alone last year, and yet they reopened
ACL, what does that stand for?
It's accumulated catch limit.
Okay.
And in our case, once we go over, we're held accountable for not only that year, but the year after if you've gone over more than that year's allocation. Recreationally, they do it on a 3-year average in South Atlantic, and then they make an assessment on, well, we went way over, but anyhow.
But how do they know what the recreational fishermen are catching?
The fact is they don't. It's just a guess, and they use that to their advantage, So I'm not trying to, blast recreational fishing and promote commercial over it, but I'm just saying we're held to a different standard, which is certainly.
So what would be your prediction for commercial fishing's future here in Hatteras?
Well, interestingly enough, somebody showed me an Island Breeze interview Irene had done with me a while back, and I said, not very bright. And anyway, the friend who showed me that said, you're still here. Yeah, but I said, ask me next year.
Well, how long ago was that? Island Breeze
I think that was in 1995, but I may be wrong. But the truth is, I've lost bottom fishing, and I guess there's always a future. You'll find another nook and cranny. And what's been interesting this year is the good Lord seems to be providing for us here lately, because the new winter fishery is ribbon fish.
Right.
Now, who would have ever thought that? I mean, it's come out of they haven't. That's probably leaving NIP scrambling. Now they got to do a management plan overnight here.
So that's a new market, essentially.
Yeah, well, it's actually not just a new market. I mean, it's just a new fishery here. I mean, nobody's really caught many prior to the last 5 or 6 years that I know of. But I went
were the ribbon fish not here before that?
Well, I think they were here, but I don't know if they were sized. Who knows? They've just never really shown up like this. But, it's been a valuable fishery other places. For instance, on a surf trip to Portugal and then Madeira, hey, they love them. And they, Espada, I think that's their name there. And, hey, they love them. That's been a big time. That's one of their biggest fisheries now. Wow. I mean, with the cod having gone down by the wayside, but it's new to us. And anyway, so I guess I'll probably be Spanish fishing with Rob. If they take long lining from us, and essentially what's happened with that is. There's so many right now. The environmentalists want to tell you there are none. Well, they're catching them from the Bahamas all the way to here now, and that's on today. I mean, on a given day, they're catching them from Bahamas to North Carolina, and yet people want to say there are none.
So, with all this frustration and this uncertainty, why do you continue to fish?
Well,
what's the attraction of it?
It's like I told you, that first time I went out with Wayne Miller, I said, this is for me. I said, the attraction, the frustration is peaking right now. I can't say it is. And anyway, this coming week I get to go to an ICAP meeting, and for instance, I got roped into being a shark technical advisor, and it's been 12 years since we've shark fished. But, we're just trying to rationalize some of the absurdities, which, for instance, one of the more incredible things is fishermen did get a black eye from shark finning years ago, but now what's so upside down in California and a few other states, for instance, if you catch sharks legitimately, sustainably, and bring the sharks to the dock, now you've essentially got to throw the fins overboard, because you can't trade, barter, or any of that with the most lucrative part of the shark carcass. And
oh my gosh, how strange.
That is strange. And that's just how upside down it's all become. And
I mean, it would seem like the
the thing that would make sense would be to try to use
Utilize
every part of
absolutely.
that fish.
That is mandated actually by ICAT, and yet they're ignoring this, and I mean, how much more upside down can it get?
That's pretty upside down. So, what do you think the personal traits or characteristics of a good fisherman? What do you?
You just gotta get up and go. I mean, you just gotta put your time in, and that's essentially all there is to it. And you put your time in, you're gonna catch fish, and that's what it comes down to, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I don't consider myself a very good fisherman, but I'm there usually. So I mean, anyway.
Okay, shifting gears here.
Right.
How did you learn how to surf? Did somebody teach you?
No, as I told you, I saw that board in the window, and that when I went to Nesson and Sales, that was a toy store my father used to go out. He would buy all kinds of stuff. He'd buy washers and dryers for the old general merchandise down there, and then he had toys on the shelf. Saw that old Malibu sitting in there, and I thought it was the hottest thing going. It was a bright red one, and I ended up coming home one year from a sailing camp my parents had sent me to, and I ended up, by the time I got home, I had a birthday, and anyway, that was the end of the sailing camp, I can tell you that, because I had a surfboard. So. And that was...
How old were you?
I was 11,
okay.
I think,
So, did you teach yourself how to surf?
Yeah, just paddled out, and those things, they were barges anyway, you couldn't fall off of them. You get the thing going, caught a wave with it, and you could stand up. It didn't take long. They weren't very performance oriented, but we managed.
And who did you surf with? Did you have a group of kids here?
I had a bunch of local kids here in Hatteras. Me, Doug, and Raymond Midget, who used to live across the creek.
Doug Meekins?
Doug Meekins, yeah. Wayne Miller, David Ross, Tim Midget to a degree. Ted, he piddled at it for a day or two. Spurgeon, even old Spurgeon got a surfboard back then, but
he did.
Back then we didn't have leashes, and after 4 or 5 days of paddling out, standing up, falling off, and having to swim all the way to the beach, he said, "This isn't surfing, this is suffering." So he quit. He faded out.
Oh. So when did you get a regular surfboard?
I finally ended up, Burness Balance broke my heart. First, I took that old Malibu down to the beach. He said, "That sure is a pretty bright red pop-out you've got there," because that's what they called those. And of course, I think he probably had a Hobie. He'd got got a nice board. Hobie. He was doing it. Buddy Hooper. You had John Oakes, Johnny Connery was coming along around then, same time, and anyhow. We'd gather our nickels and pennies together and throw a few coins there in Wayne's gas tank, and scud on up to Buxton in his old Falcon if we didn't have a wave down here in Hatteras. But anyhow, we got around. We had a blast, and back then it was a bit different than it is now. You see a car pull up, you say, "Oh no." Nowadays, back then you were glad to see somebody because nobody else was doing it. Anyway.
So do you remember when out-of-town surfers started showing up?
There were a few that would pop in here or then, and some of the guys come from Virginia Beach or whatnot. And like I said, we'd go out of our way to be friendly back then, and it's not to say we're not now, but I mean it was. It was like fishing without management, and surfing without cries. It was one and the same.
So, the relationship between the local surfers and the out-of-towners is pretty good?
Oh yeah, it was great.
Okay.
I mean, through the 70s, I would say. I don't know, it might have started taking a downturn in the mid to late 70s, or yeah, probably the mid 70s. Then it was pretty big influx of out-of-towners, and I'd probably sort of faded a little bit out of it by then, to where I kind of got out of it for a few years, having to accept responsibilities with the family. And it's not to say I quit surfing, it's just to say it wasn't my focus like it was prior and is now. Okay. So.
What kind of board do you have now?
Well, I got interestingly enough, when I was in high school, and I got in a car wreck in my last year of high school, and I ended up breaking my leg and about every other bone in my body, and quickest way back in the water was
Did that happen on the island?
Yeah, right down here. We ran into Genus Junior's trash truck, me, Spurgeon, Tim, and Harold on.
Phew.
And
was everybody injured?
Yeah, Spurgeon, he just about bled to death.
Was there the medical center here?
Yeah, but, it's just like the other day. A friend of mine's pug got run over, and the vet wasn't here, and of course Dr. Burroughs wasn't here then either, so they flew us out with a Navy helicopter, and anyway,
to Elizabeth City?
Yeah,
or?
we went to Albemarle Hospital, and so the quickest way back in the water from that was about a month and a half later. I just happened to be checking out my Surfer magazine, and they had a kneeboard in there, and that was unique to me, because I'd been surfing for, I guess, 8 or 9 years by then, and so I got that, and finally got my leg. I never did have a cast on it, and I don't know, within a month and a half I hobbled down to the jetty there, and with my crutch, and well, I don't know if it was a jetty, I don't even know if it was there then. Anyway, I went to the lighthouse, and Rob Fincham reminded me of that the other day. He said, the first time I saw you, you were hobbling down there with a crutch. You jumped in and paddled out. Anyway, I was...
And what's a kneeboard versus a regular surfboard? Do they look different?
Well, they're just shorter, and
okay.
They've got knee pads on them. But anyway, I mix it up, but predominantly anymore between having to tote that old Malibu around those pine net stakes, my back went size. So truth is, I have more fun on a kneeboard, and it's hard to explain unless you've done it. And, I've done both. And believe me, I'd rather kneeboard any day than surf. So.
What other countries have you visited where you've surfed?
I don't know. At least been to the Portugal, Spain, Canaries, Madeira, Indonesia a couple times, Fiji 4 or 5 times, Samoa, American Samoa, Chile, Ecuador, all through Central America, and most recently Nicaragua. I would be in Fiji right now if I just hadn't had my little medical issue with cat scratch fever, as I just told you.
Yes.
Anyhow, but
so, what is it that you like about surfing?
well, it's just being involved with the I told you the name on my boat. It's called Seabound. It's just about being one with the sea. I couldn't live a mile inland. That's just the way it is. No
Do you
way
feel more comfortable on the water than on land?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep. It seems like this old sore back of mine, it gets to feeling better as soon as I get on the boat, just rocking and rolling, exercising or whatever. But anyhow, it's just...
Is there anything on land that you like to do?
Oh yeah, sure. But
do you have hobbies?
Yeah, some. Well, put it this way, I don't know. Me and Katie, we vacation separately at least once a year. And I go surfing, and she goes somewhere in Europe to look around. I don't know. And I'm usually thinking about fishing or surfing, one of the two. I guess I do other things, but that's where my focus is. So, and I don't fish when I'm on a surf trip either.
Okay. But do you notice fishing boats?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I make that a point, and you know, that's.
And do you eat lots of seafood when you're on?
Absolutely, sure, got to. Yeah, got to support your local fishermen. You know that.
That's
Susan.
right. How about talking about seafood? What is your? Do you eat a lot of fish, and do you have a particular favorite?
Katie says she never gets to eat any fish because all I want to do is sell and make money for it. But yeah, we eat seafood a lot, and I do like to, see where it comes from when I go on a trip, and I've been sick by eating seafood other places too, and as you know, I was telling you before, it may have been some seafood we had in Plias there where your husband is right at the moment here, so I'm not sure, so I always like to, try to tap the source and see exactly where it's coming from when I'm away from home, but anyhow.
That's probably good advice all the time.
Well, with all the crap that's being dumped on in our domestic markets from the seafood coming out of China and the farm-raised crap and antibiotic-laden stuff, I'd be awfully concerned, but ironically, our government seems to be on a path to ensure that 100% of the seafood we eat is imported. And that's unfortunate. So.
Do you have any other types of outdoor recreation besides surfing?
Me, like I said, well, let me think.
Do you play golf?
No. I used to. I love to, but I just, riding up the road and going and doing that. It's just, I don't know. It's, as I mentioned before, it seemed like you never find the time if you were a fisherman. You either had a pine net to work on or something to do, or a piece of gill net to hang to get ready to go again. And it's like your husband. What does he do besides surf and fish? Does he do anything? Not much.
Not much.
Okay.
Not much. That's the focus.
I mean, hey, you've always got something to do on your gear or your boat or something, it seems like. I don't know. Hey, all my buddies trying to get me to go kiteboarding, but around here, hey, you never have any time off if you started doing that because it's always blowing. The wind
That's true.
And that's your only reason to come home from fishing too. So you need some time off once in a while.
That's true.
So.
One last question. I mean, Hatteras Island has changed a lot in the almost 40 years that I've lived here. Did you, when you were a kid, can you compare what it was like then to what it's like now? Is it the same, or is it? It's kind
of like I was just telling you. Our summers were bustling, but the winter it was pretty desolate and wasn't much going on, and it's definitely changed a lot. It's truthfully hard to say. Back then we had a theater. When I was a kid, theater was right here, by Austin's. My grandfather had the theater.
Really?
Actually, my Uncle Shank, and that was what became part of Durant's Motel before it washed away. But the theater was
goodness.
It was right between the parsonage over here and Austin's store. So,
Okay.
I mean, we even had a theater back then. We didn't even have a theater. Of course, we've got TV. And we didn't need a pipe wrench. We don't need a pipe wrench now to get the TV signal coming in. But, so I don't know, but we got by, and it was neat times.
So sort of a mixed bag.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to change anything about it. Growing up here, nothing at all. I mean, it was great. So, yep.
Well, thanks, Jeff.
Yep. Well, thank you, Susan.
I
appreciate it too. Anyhow. I hope